Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this AI Accelerator webinar, which tonight is focused on successfully delivering value with AI. Okay, right. Very welcome to this AI Accelerator talk about realizing value from AI in business. I'm Sarah Burnett. I'm your host this evening. I'm founder of AI Accelerator, which I set up about 4 years ago to get more women into the field of AI. But I'm pleased to say the sessions are open to all and are free. AI Accelerator is a series of free webinars and workshops designed to introduce the topic and explore various aspects of AI from theory to practice. I'm absolutely delighted to say that this evening we've got my colleague Katie Gibbs. She is an expert and is a well-known speaker in the AI event circuit. She's founding partner and head of consulting services at Emergence Partners and has previously ran consulting projects for AI and has headed up the AI department at BJSS and has been part of Accenture's innovation team as well. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Katie to get the proceedings started. Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for asking me to give today's talk. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be sharing my talk today on how to successfully deliver value with AI, because AI is so hyped. There's so much talk around it, there's so much noise that actually it can become very difficult to understand what the true value is and how best to deliver it. So I'm going to be sharing a few insights and top tips that I've learned from my journey. And I actually wanted to start by sharing a little bit about myself and my journey with AI, because it's pretty unconventional. It might surprise you to learn that I actually started, I left University of Leeds as a language graduate. I didn't know anything about technology. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But what I did know was that I wanted to work with people and I wanted a really varied job. I wanted to try out different things to see what I liked and didn't like. So I jumped at the opportunity when I was offered a role at Accenture, and I was really thrown in the deep end. So I was placed in part of the tech consulting team, which I hoped was just a label they gave to the team and didn't mean I'd actually have to do much work with technology, if I'm being honest. And my very first project was a data center migration project. So the very first task I was given was briefing the senior stakeholders on the client team around our data migration strategy. And I'm honestly not exaggerating. I genuinely did not know what a server was. I didn't understand what a data center was. So this was a really daunting experience, and it was a real baptism of fire. But it gave me a really great foundational understanding of infrastructure. And from there, I worked on various different projects and increasingly became much more client-centric in the work that I was doing and thinking about the customer experience. I eventually found myself in the Accenture innovation team, as Sarah mentioned. And this was where I first came into contact with both artificial intelligence and design thinking, which are my two core passions today. And the AI projects that I was working on, despite being part of an innovation team, were incredibly practical. So the very first AI project I worked on was around predicting bed capacity in hospitals, something that's still very much relevant today. But the frustration I had was that the innovation team at Accenture back then was very much a sales vehicle. So it was about showcasing the art of the possible, but less so about actually delivering that innovative technology for specific clients. That tends to get handed over to different teams. So I decided to change things up quite considerably, and I moved to a startup. I was their 5th employee, and quite a shock after the mammoth likes of Accenture. And this company evolved a few times, but eventually ended up to be Heron AI. And Heron AI was a independent AI consultancy, and it was really focused on blending a people-centric approach and the design thinking that I became really quite addicted to with the design and delivery of artificial intelligence solutions. And I did a lot of work in this space as the head of consulting delivery, and then actually I led Heron for a while as well. And it was really about cutting through that noise to help provide agnostic advice to organizations on how best to utilize artificial intelligence and how to do it in a people-centric manner. And also quite a few years of working on that, I fancied a new challenge. So I moved to BJSS as head of AI. And this was a really great experience because I did a lot of work in the public sector and a lot around educating people on ethical AI, people-centric design, and really considering the human implications of these artificial solutions. And one of the things that I realized was working for a larger consultancy is that there's so many teams and everyone's got their own role to play. So my role became more and more focused on AI and less focused on design thinking. So I found that narrow scope wasn't quite suited to what I wanted to do. I'm a problem solver at heart, and I think you have to start with people and then think about how technology can help enable that solution. So then earlier this year, in perfect timing for the pandemic reaching us, I joined together with Sarah and the other founding partners of Emergence, and really kind of culminated all that experience that I had to bring to the consulting team this people-centric focus and becoming very collaborative with clients and co-creating solutions. But because we've got a broader reach and really thinking about digital innovation and digital transformation, I feel that I finally have this flexibility and freedom in order to actually challenge whether AI is the right solution or not, rather than constantly trying to sell AI projects. So it's been a really great journey. Certainly, I would never have expected that I would be working in technology, let alone artificial intelligence. And I am not technical. I to this day haven't trained as a technical person, and I really firmly believe that we need more non-technical people working in this space. So you know, if I can do it, I firmly believe that anyone else out there can learn about AI and become an expert in the space. And I've learned a lot, as I mentioned, around what it looks like to be successful when designing and delivering AI. I've helped a lot of companies design AI systems. I've helped them firefight when their AI projects have gone completely wrong. But the key reflection for me is that the key learning that I've got from this, and the key skill, is how to solve human problems and frustrations in an empathetic way. And this often does include applying technology to the problem, but it doesn't always. And AI isn't always the technology that's going to be the answer to that problem. And I really want to frame my talk today in this way because I'm going to share how I believe companies can be successful with AI by taking this human-centric approach and putting humans at the center of their AI strategy and their AI solutions. And now is absolutely the right time to be talking about this. Prior to the pandemic, there was this constant tension between humans and machines, employees and artificial intelligence. And there was a lot of talk around AI taking jobs, and a lot of organizations considered AI as a means of cutting costs. And what I found was actually companies tend to sit either end of the spectrum. Either they'd embrace AI and recognize that it was going to have a detrimental impact on the customer experience and the employee experience, or the other end of the spectrum, they absolutely refuse to use AI due to concerns about how it might diminish that empathetic and human customer service that they prided themselves on. And the frustration that I had was that both organizations sitting at both ends of the spectrum were missing out on an opportunity to optimize their user experience of artificial intelligence. It was very much one or the other. But what's happened with the pandemic is that humans have come to the forefront. Finally, we're really becoming a very people-centric society, especially thinking about technology. So now organizations are considering how they can use AI to empower their workforce rather than replace them. And this is a real shift in mindset. And we've seen it from overworked healthcare workers to people having to work remotely. technology has really come to the forefront to enable organizations with their business continuity plans to continue trading, but also to deliver the service to an increasingly concerned and worried customer base. So there's a brilliant opportunity, and organizations are really starting to embrace that. And yeah, I think for a very long time, executives have recognized the value in AI. So 42% of executives have said that they believe that AI will be of critical importance within the next 2 years. 58% of companies have adopted machine learning, and that's growing by at least 5% year on year. So there's definitely a recognition in the marketplace and across all industries of the value that AI can bring. And we've seen some really great success stories. And one of the key areas is healthcare. I think there's a lot being done in this space. And this was released earlier this month around AI helping doctors better predict patients who are going to develop oral cancer. We've seen AI that can better detect cancer on lung scans. So what I find really interesting about this headline here is actually that the language is completely different to what it would have been a year ago. A year ago, it would have been AI can better predict the risk of patients developing oral cancer than doctors, whereas now it's very much framed as AI can help doctors. So this really highlights this shift in attitude that we've seen in the last 8 months. But there's also some other great things that are being done with artificial intelligence. One of my favorite examples is the AI for Earth solution that Microsoft's been working on. So essentially, they've been designing this to help fight extinction. There are 90,000 threatened species, and they're using artificial intelligence to tag animals and track them against the photos and videos uploaded by the public. The idea is that if you are on holiday somewhere, you go whale watching, if you take pictures of whales and upload it to the system, they'll be able to recognize that it's a particular whale and map its journey and its movements, understand its social group, and I think critically understand what the threats are so that they can better inform conservation policies and take action to protect these threatened species. And then something not nearly as important, but a really great example of how people are getting creative with AI is the Alexa Developers app that can now translate cat meows so that you can interact with your feline companions and find out if they're hungry, if they want to cuddle, whatever it might be. So there's plenty of great success stories out there, and it's understandable now to see why executives are much more willing to embrace technology, and particularly artificial intelligence. But the struggle that we're now facing is that public perception is becoming increasingly negative. A while ago, this was really due to sci-fi movies, Terminator, through to Daily Mail headlines about robots destroying the world and there's nothing we can do about it. But now it's an uphill struggle to get customers and citizens on board because of some of the negative headlines that they've seen. So there's definitely this increasing awareness of what AI can do and how it's being used in the public domain. From voice assistants in everyone's homes to the police trialing facial recognition. Some have been more successful than others, some have been absolute disasters. But there's a real issue of trust here. The public don't have trust in the technology, they don't trust the outputs, and they don't trust that it's being used in the right way. And over summer, there were multiple headlines that have really contributed to this nervousness. And it is worth noting that nearly half of the people in Europe think that AI will be harmful. So this is a significant amount of people that are really quite concerned about the consequences of AI and how it's being used. So I wanted to reflect on some of these negative headlines and think about what went wrong and how this is being perceived by the public. And the first one that I wanted to revisit, I'm sure everyone remembers this, is hit headlines, there's a lot of noise around it, and that's the botched A-levels algorithm. And actually, I think that the use of AI and automated decision making came into a really sharp focus after this incident. So for anyone who needs a quick reminder, essentially what happened is the exam regulator, of course, used an algorithm in order to determine A-level grades, but it ends up downgrading almost 40% of A-level grades, which were assessed by teachers. And it was found that the downgrading affected state schools much more than the private sector. So this was, I'm sure everyone remembers, it was a really difficult situation. Pupils were incredibly distraught because 40% of them didn't get the grades they were expecting. Teachers were incredibly disenfranchised and felt very disengaged because their input hadn't been used in the right way to train the system. They felt very let down by it. And I think one of the biggest impacts was on universities, which I don't think had been prepared for, which was that universities just couldn't cope with clearing. They had all these phone calls coming in from 40% of their prospective students saying they hadn't got the grades. And then I think it was about 10 days later, the government then did a U-turn, scrapped the system and said that the teacher predictive grades were going to be used instead. So it's a really great example of every single possible thing that could have gone wrong. And in overlooking the teacher assessments in that way, they weren't validating the outputs. And if they'd taken a much more blended approach, then I really don't think that this would have been such a disaster. And it's worth noting that as a result of this, the GCSE results were decided according to teacher assessments. They built an algorithm for it, but decided not to use it. So there's a huge amount of time and funding that's gone into building these algorithms and training these algorithms that goes down the drain due to the fact that they haven't been designed in the right way. And then just 1 week later, the poor public sector was hit again when it was announced that councils were scrapping the use of algorithms in benefit and welfare decisions. So 1 in 3 councils were using algorithms to help make decisions about benefit claims. One council found it often wrongly identified low-risk claims as high risk, while another found the system didn't actually make a difference to its work. So again, when you think about the amount of time and investment that's gone into these systems, just for them to be scrapped and reconsidered, the public sector are clearly rushing to implement AI, particularly machine learning, but they're not considering the human impact. They're not thinking about the best way to design these solutions. And this results in the algorithms being scrapped, wasted funds. But fundamentally, this approach just isn't working. And actually, I think the worst example of this was when the Home Office had to scrap a racist algorithm, which was meant to be helping decide visa applications after allegations that it contained entrenched racism. This algorithm was actually described as speedy boarding for white people. And what's disappointing and frustrating here is that it was only when a legal challenge against the system was launched that the algorithm was scrapped. So there isn't this awareness, even when systems are live and they know they're not performing, there isn't awareness of designing them for the people who are going to be most impacted by them. And the reason I chose these examples in the public sector, I have given the public sector a little bit of a bashing, but it's really to emphasize that the public are becoming increasingly aware of the negative PR surrounding AI, and predominantly that has been because of mistakes and disasters in the public sector. And I think also people are becoming increasingly aware of the real life consequences that AI can have. But it's not just public sector, even the tech experts are getting this wrong. So earlier this year, MIT had to take offline a massive and highly cited data set that was widely used to train AI systems because it was teaching AI to use racist and misogynistic terms to describe people. And this is a data set that had been in use for years. So just think of all the systems that had been trained on this racist and sexist data set. And then Google hit headlines and had to apologize when it was found that its Vision AI produced racist results. So the image of a hand holding a temperature gun was labeled differently depending on the skin color of the person holding it. So after I've shared some of these disasters and bad examples of how to implement AI, it might not come as a shock that only 85% of AI projects fail, but only 15% are actually successful. So despite the fact that AI implementation has grown 270% in the past 4 years, 85% of AI projects fail. And as we've seen, when they fail, the stakes can be incredibly high. So I've been reflecting on this a lot and really trying to understand why this is. And fundamentally, what I think it comes down to is that these organizations are taking an incredibly tech-led approach. They're jumping on the bandwagon to explore what's possible with AI and rushing to get things into production due to the business case. But they're not thinking from a business perspective, not thinking from a user perspective. It's very much about the output of the system, the accuracy of the system. And the result of this is that you get overlooked users. So think back to those teachers and the students with A-level algorithm who felt completely betrayed by that algorithm. And as we've seen, PR disasters. And the thing that really frustrates me about this is that these are missed opportunities. If the algorithms had been designed and tested in the right way, they would have been such a brilliant example of how to deliver value of AI in the public domain, something that people could really relate to and help wrap their heads around what AI can do and the value it can add. And it's worth noting that taking a human-centric approach to developing AI is inherently more ethical. Because if you're taking a tech-led approach and you overlook human expertise and your users, then that's actually a risk to your business. Because if you take a cost-cutting approach and reducing headcount, it's going to result in a loss of business knowledge and skills. So what happens if your AI system fails? What's your backup plan? Who has that breadth of knowledge and experience that your employees do if you get rid of them? It has a huge impact on company culture. And as we've seen, it has an impact on negative brand perception and how organizations are viewed by the public. And I think this is one of the most crucial stats for me, is that 65% of employees are likely to leave their employer if they're being negatively portrayed in the news or on social media. And with all the PR disasters that I've just reflected on, the employees are going to be really struggling to understand the value that AI brings and what the value proposition is for them working there. So AI really does require that human oversight in order to prevent biased decision making. And organizations that are overlooking that are risking their employee base and the skill sets they need in order to make that successful. And one of the other things that I think is probably causing a lot of confusion in the AI marketplace is that there's too much focus on ethical frameworks. Almost every consultancy out there, every AI vendor has some high-level principles around what it means to deliver ethical AI. You know, everything from transparency to fairness. And they are a really great starting point. But the issue is that they're incredibly high level. And I just think this is a perfect example. It's a high-level expert group on AI. So they're not even claiming to go deeper into how you should be designing and what the right approach is. And the ethics guidelines are in draft. These will be in draft forever as far as I'm concerned, because there's always more to uncover. And as AI matures and evolves, there's only going to be more ethical concerns that we need to take into consideration. So it's not that I think ethical frameworks are useless or anything like that. I think there's a lot of value in it, and it's a really great starting point. But there's not enough consideration for the specifics of AI design, because AI design has to go deeper than compliance or high-level principles. It has to go to the very root of your company, your values, and the industry in which you operate in order to best serve your users. So with that, I'm going to share my thoughts and expertise on how to be successful with AI, because as we've seen, it's not enough just to fight fires as and when they come up. You need to set yourself up for success at the very beginning by taking a very considered and human approach to artificial intelligence. And as I've shared, employees play a crucial role in this. And I think there's another thing that come into focus due to the pandemic is that the employee value proposition is really coming to the forefront. For years prior, it was all about customer experience. So it's really great to see that employee experience is becoming increasingly more important. Because when you think about it, how your employees feel at work, whether they feel valued and empowered, that's going to have a direct impact on how they serve your customers. So it makes much more sense to start with your employees and see the trickle-down effect through to your customers than start with your customers and work your way backwards. So my recommendation is always to consider how AI adoption impacts on the employee value proposition. And there's various canvases out there that you can use for this, but I picked on kind of a few of the key areas that we always explore. And the first is around the values of the company. The values of a company need to be reflected in the adoption and implementation of technology. You can't have empathy as one of your core values, and then when it comes to implementing technology, you're forcing it on people and they don't feel like they're part of the process. If empathy is one of your core values, you need to go and understand people's pain points and how AI can best address them, rather than making assumptions on their behalf. You need to co-create the solutions with your employees. The next one is around people. I think this is something that often gets overlooked. People come to work majority of the time because of the great relationships they form with colleagues. They like working with the people they're working with. And similar to the stat I shared before, 86% of employees won't continue to work for a company if they've got a bad reputation with other employees or the public. So you need to think about how, what your messaging is and how that's being shared across the organisation. Because if you're cutting heads in a particular department due to AI replacing them, that's going to have a knock-on effect in people in other teams, and it's going to cause a lot of uncertainty. The third area that we look at within the employee proposition is learning and development. And this is where I think AI offers a really great opportunity to train your employees on how to use the systems, how to oversee the output, how to overlay their own expertise and skills, but also to spot new opportunities for using AI. If they find an inefficient process or they're getting a lot of complaints from customers about a particular area, then if they're taken on that AI journey, they can start framing it as, oh, I think AI could be a really interesting solution for that. And I think that having that L&D approach to implementing AI is such a value add for employees, rather than feeling like it's being done to them. And the fourth one is all around work routines and practices. So of course, AI is about driving efficiencies, delivering better insights into data. But if you go about it in a way that's about addressing their pain points, understanding the common frustrations, and delivering an enhanced experience day to day, then that's going to make such a huge difference and help bring those people on the journey with you. And all of these four factors really contribute to the wow factor and helps you to stand out as an employer who's empowering your workforce with artificial intelligence and helping them develop the skills they need to work with AI and become part of the future workforce, rather than overlooking their expertise and making them redundant. So that's kind of my first recommendation on where to start, is really thinking about the employee value proposition and where AI fits into that and how it can support and enable your employee value proposition. The second one is around diversity of skills. So I mentioned that I'm not technical and I'm a real advocate for non-technical people working in this space. So this is something that I think is of critical importance. So the team setup will vary depending on the type of AI. So as an example, I'm going to use a machine learning project team just to talk around some of the different skills that could be used. So typically you'd have a data scientist who is working away on the machine learning, be that predictive analytics, natural language processing, image recognition, and they'd be supported by an ML engineer. And the ML engineer's responsibility is really around productionizing the data science, for ensuring that you can get out of that proof of concept loop to deliver ongoing and repeatable value. And hopefully, machine learning projects have a data governor, someone who's overseeing the appropriate and compliant use of data and taking responsibility for master data management. So these are kind of the, there's often many more roles as well, but these are the foundational tech roles that you'd have within the ML team. then what I always advocate for is adding in a product owner, so someone who's defined the vision for that AI solution and how it ties into the overall organizational strategy. And they'll continuously assess what the business value is from the machine learning as it's being designed, trained, and rolled out. And they'll be looking for opportunities to maximize it. So, looking out for different use cases, looking at expanding the scope to target extra user base, or whatever it might be. But they'll oversee that development to ensure that it stays on point for that vision, and that it's delivering value from a business perspective, not just a technical perspective. And the second role that I always strongly recommend is a service designer, because a service designer is really embedding that user-centric approach. So they will map out the end-to-end user journeys and understand what the as-is looks like and what the to-be looks like with that machine learning solution. And they'll understand what that value add is and what the user impact is. And one of the crucial things that the service designer will do is understand the unhappy path as well as the happy path. So they will plan for the potential disasters and think about how you could best mitigate that. And for instance, a service designer probably would have considered the impact of that A-level algorithm on universities trying to manage clearing. So there's definitely a role for softer skills, and these are very much needed if you're going to deliver human-centric and thoughtful AI solutions to deliver real and lasting value. But it's not just about diversity of skills. Of course, it's about the diversity of the team as well. And it's somewhat, it's downright depressing, these stats, but Facebook's AI team is 85% male. Google's AI team is 90% male. So these AI solutions are being designed in a gender bubble, and it's having real world consequences. Google's word embedding model began projecting gender biases into Google Translate a couple of years ago. And the impact of that was essentially it assumed that CEOs or engineers were male and teachers and nurses were female. And it was prevalent. So we definitely need to have more diverse and critical people looking at this earlier on in the process. And what I find really quite frustrating with this is 91% of people have said that diversity has had a positive impact on AI technology. So they're recognizing the value of having a diverse team. Yet, despite this, globally, only 22% of AI professionals are female. We're still slightly higher than Google and Facebook, but a low proportion. And of course, it's not just about gender diversity. It's also really important to have people on the team from a range of backgrounds, ethnicities, geographies, to design a product for a range of users and not just design for themselves as a user. Which brings me on to my next recommendation, which is user testing. As with anything, the more testing you do, the better, and particularly testing out all the different scenarios. And part of that testing is to really consider whether any elements of the human, cultural, system diversity have been overlooked whilst you're developing the system. And I've got a really great example. So there is a European-based robotic Hoover company, and they used AI within the Hoover to pick up hair, and it did it in a special way so it wouldn't get tangled up and block the mechanism. And they got a huge order in from South Korea. So they went, brilliant, let's send these off, ship them off. This is brilliant. We're launching into a new geography. And what happened was they hit headlines with "My vacuum cleaner ate my hair," and some poor South Korean woman's hair was eaten by the vacuum cleaner when she slept, because that company hadn't tested with diverse user groups. They didn't test the robotic Hoover with South Korean user groups before fully launching there. So what they didn't realize is that the majority of their users in South Korea sleep on the floor, which is why she woke up with a Hoover attached to her head. So it's a light-hearted example, but hopefully it really highlights the importance of testing with a diverse user group and really understanding what the unhappy paths might look like so you can prevent them from occurring. Another example that most people probably come across is there was a hand dryer that was trained using image recognition. So it would detect using image recognition when there was a hand beneath it in order to switch on. But it'd only been trained and tested with people with white skin. So what happened was they put it into production, they sold a load of them, and then it didn't recognize any other skin tones. So there's some real life examples of where this lack of diversity is having real consequences. And I've picked two lighthearted ones, but as we've seen with the visa algorithm, this can have real meaningful consequences, and often quite disastrous consequences. So it's definitely really important, in my view, to take a human-centric approach to explore how AI can deliver value to users. And when I say users, I mean all users, really understanding what that user base looks like, creating personas for them and testing with them. But it's also really critical to challenge yourselves and keep asking this question: is AI the right solution? Because AI has fallen foul of a proof of concept loop. There's so many organizations who jumped on the bandwagon of AI without really thinking about what the use case was, what the user requirements were, rather seeing it as a competitive advantage. So I need to be shown to be using AI in order to be self-competition. And I think the worst example of this that I saw was when I was working with a retail bank on the AI strategy. They shared that 130 AI proof of concepts in flight at that very point in time. And they had absolutely no idea on what the roadmap to production looked like. Because essentially what happened is all these different departments had developed their own AI systems or implemented a vendor's AI system in isolation. So they'd had all these walled gardens of people working in silo, and they didn't have any visibility of which systems were being used, what solutions were being used, how it was being used, what problems they were trying to solve, or how that tied into the overall strategy. They just didn't have any sort of AI strategy in place. And so I find it really insightful that 20% of companies have cited peer pressure as the reason that they embarked on AI projects. So this really emphasizes the fact that there's a lot of peer pressure in a space to seem like you're doing something with AI, and that's not the reason to be using it. So I strongly recommend continuously ask yourself: is AI the right solution? Are we using AI for the sake of AI? And it's also worth, if you're working with AI vendors, challenging them as well. 40% of AI vendors last year were found to not actually use artificial intelligence. So it's very much being used as a buzzword in order to develop, improve pipeline and generate sales. So it can be very difficult to cut through all that noise and determine how to be successful with AI and what good looks like. So only 16% of companies have figured out how to make AI work at scale. So this really highlights that proof of concept loop, where people are committed to developing something with an AI solution, and then they keep struggling to get it into production. There's a few reasons for it. It might just not be the right solution. It might not be delivering the acceptance criteria that they need. But it also might be that the users that are impacted are incredibly resistant. So if you are developing a machine learning algorithm to detect fraudulent transactions in a bank, if you are trying to then roll that out to the fraud team, if you don't do it in the right way and in a way that's very understanding of their day-to-day jobs and processes and what their pain points are, then they're just going to outright refuse to use it. So there's definitely, it's coming back to the employee value proposition and taking this human-centric approach. It's absolutely crucial to understand what the user's pain points are and how AI might be able to solve them, rather than making those assumptions, because it just creates more conflict and more disillusionment with AI solutions. So in summary, kind of some of the top tips that I have, the first is around setting a vision for the future. And when I talk around setting a vision for the future, I'm not talking about setting a vision for AI. I'm talking about zooming out 5 to 10 years and thinking about what would amazing look like for our customers, what would amazing look like for our employees, and having an ideation session to really eke out what that could look like, and then work your way backwards and think about how technology can enable that vision for the future. Because what's great about new and emerging tech and it kind of evolving, maturing, is that it is what's making the art of the possible possible. And it's then that you start to explore how AI can contribute towards that vision, so that you're aligning it to strategic goals rather than going off in all directions and experimenting with it. And then once you've mapped out that vision for the future, you've understood what technology can do to contribute towards it, and particularly, whether AI is going to play a role, and if so, what it could do, then you can start to define what the short-term initiatives are that you can run in the next 3, 6, and 9 months in order to get you closer to that vision. So whether that's mapping out user journeys to understand pain points, doing user interviews to better understand how they feel about artificial intelligence and how you can engage them, through to assessing vendors. But it's a really great way of framing it so that you can keep up to date with AI technologies as they evolve and mature. So you've still got the flexibility and you can pivot as needed, but it's keeping it very focused on what that future vision is and how you can best meet it. And my second key takeaway from my experience is that you need to do some tech education up front. You can't assume when you're talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning or natural language processing or vision AI, like there's so many buzzwords within AI, which is itself a buzzword, that it can be incredibly difficult for your users to understand what it is and what it means. And as we've seen, there's a lot of fear being propagated by both media and actually in the way that AI is being implemented in the public sector. So it's definitely very worthwhile establishing a foundational knowledge of AI across the team, diving into the different types of AI and the application of AI so people can really understand it. And the outcome of that is that you'll make informed decisions on how best to design and implement AI as a team, rather than having one person acting as your go-to expert. It's particularly important with executives, I think, that they have that foundational understanding of AI so that they feel that they're making informed decisions when it comes to budgeting as well. And then the third area, hopefully this has come across in everything that I've shared so far, is the cultural impact. And at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to exploring use cases where AI can deliver value to employees and understanding what the knock-on effect of that would be on customers, because it will be a positive impact. If you're making your life easier for your employees, it will be a better experience for your customers. So I'd always recommend mapping out what the to-be process looks like and really understanding how you can overlay human expertise with the algorithm, with the AI solution, not only as a kind of disaster recovery if something goes wrong, you've got someone overlooking it and can kind of go back into manual mode, but also to oversee the training of the AI solution so they can ensure that it is getting better over time and it's not being trained on a dodgy data set or a biased data set. So that's a really important part of designing and developing AI. And the last point around cultural impact is empowering your users and taking them on that AI journey with you so that they can continuously be looking out for different opportunities to improve artificial intelligence, but actually just so they've got the right mindset to embrace an enduring culture of change. They don't get caught in doing the same thing day in, day out, that they get excited by the new ways of working that technology presents, and particularly artificial intelligence presents. So with that, profound transformation is a term that we use a lot at Emergence because we fundamentally want to make the world a better place to live and work. And we believe that we can inspire profound transformation within organizations by helping them to achieve both efficient gains and long-lasting impact with advanced technologies. And of course, AI is a key driver within that. So I want to really quickly just share a few of our core offerings that we keep coming back to time and time again. Each of these are incredibly bespoke, but just to give you an idea of how we work with clients, the approach that we take, and the work that we do, because it is quite different to what's going on in the marketplace. So the first is our Propel workshop, And we start by setting the scene and ensuring that all the attendees are embracing an exponential mindset. So when you're kind of caught in the day-to-day doing of a job, it can be you end up fighting fires and thinking about incremental changes rather than thinking about that vision for the future and what amazing would look like. So we get everyone on board with that exponential mindset up front before zooming out to explore the art of possible, to consider what amazing would look like. And then, as I said, kind of zooming in to identify those short-term initiatives. The second is an opportunity assessment, and this is our fast-track consulting program. It takes elements from our 3 different teams, but it's really forming a launch pad for profound business transformation. And we take an incredibly user-centric approach. So we do user surveys, user interviews, information requests, we do market analysis, and we combine that with the mindset and tech education workshops in order to identify tech-driven opportunities and build out a roadmap to deliver them. So this is a really great launch pad if you're considering, what the opportunity is with AI within your organization. And as I said, always recommend taking that human-centric approach up front to understand how you can augment your workforce. And the third is a tech diagnostic, and there's kind of two versions of this. One is around organizations who are looking to optimize their tech stack for the future. So potentially just starting to explore how AI can benefit them. So with that, we'll map out what the as-is tech landscape is, what the to-be could look like with new and emerging technologies, and really assess what the impact would be on customer employee experiences with those technologies. But the other is a tech diagnostic for people who are stuck in that AI proof of concept loop. So really helping them understand which of those proof of concepts can and should be productionized, which ones contribute towards the overall strategy and vision for the future, and actually putting in the best practices to ensure that they don't just get out of this proof of concept loop now, that they've got the right methodology in place to continuously get things into production. So with that, I hope that's been insightful, and it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the things I've learned throughout my career. So please, if you want to get in touch to find out more about Emergence, our offerings, or about having a career in AI tech, particularly women in tech, then please do get in touch. My email's on there. And I think, Sarah, we're now going to go on to some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Katie. A very insightful presentation. BCS being a very skills-oriented organisation with a lot of members that are very interested in gaining skills to get into the field of AI. I wonder if we could explore the kind of skills that they need a bit more. So you talked about product owner and service designer. Do they typically have to have AI experience before they can get into, the kind of vicious circle that organizations can get in, or applicants can get into, that they can't get that first job in AI, and yet everybody wants experience? Do you find that's the case, or is it easy?
I think it's definitely it's a difficult blocker to overcome. I think it's probably getting slightly easier now with organizations recognizing transferable skills into the AI field. But even 18 months ago, people were quite in a lot of disbelief about the fact that I had a role in AI because I'm not technical. So I think that it's definitely possible, and there's quite a few routes through. And to your point, Sarah, I think for product owners and service designers, it's not about having loads of experience in AI. It's about having the right mindset. So have a foundational knowledge, and there's plenty of resources out there so you can find out a bit more. Actually, Emergence have some tech knowledge series that we've kind of demystified AI, which might be a good starting point. But I would say really the key thing is about being a problem solver. It's about understanding and being empathetic to people's pain points and what their frustrations are, and being quite creative with how you could resolve those. And it's not to say that some of the out there solutions you might create are definitely going to go ahead and have business value, but it's a really great process to go through because it opens people's minds up to the different possibilities. So, I mean, the other area that I'd recommend doing a bit of research into is design thinking, because design thinking is essentially a training mechanism to ensure that you have that user-centric approach from ideation through to empathy mapping. And that's really how I got into artificial intelligence. I started with design thinking and really considering the users at the end of the day, and how to use that as a launchpad for delivering value of AI.
Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please post them. There is a questions section that you can post your questions. In the meantime, I do have one other question that's come in, and that is, Katie, if we use experts to help train AI systems, then is there a danger that the experts become less experienced and expertise stops growing? I guess this is about succession planning as well, which is a bigger conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a really great question. It's something that is very prevalent in the machine learning space. So a lot of data scientists, it's why actually there tends to be a split between data scientists and machine learning engineers, because data scientists found a few years ago that they were developing these algorithms and then were expected just to maintain those algorithms for as long as they were needed to. And that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to continuously kind of experiment with different algorithms, start from scratch. I'm being a little bit, taking a bit of a generalization here, but they tend to want to explore the art of the possible with machine learning, whereas machine learning engineers really put in the right parameters in place to ensure that they'll be successful in production. You've got the right monitoring in place. So it's definitely a risk, and it's something that specialists in the field are very aware of and very resistant to. And I think actually that's one of the reasons it's been difficult to productionize a lot of AI systems, because organizations are relying on their AI experts to monitor and train the systems when that's just frankly not what they want to do or where they see the value being added.
Right, thank you. Another question. Thank you, Katie, for your amazing and exciting talk with some real examples, real challenges, and your deep insights based on the human-centric thinking. Your profound transformation. Are you suggesting some democratization framework for business and people, as one size doesn't fit all? And the second part to that, also, how would you fit data into this, as it is the fuel for AI?
Oh, that's a good one. So I'll start with the democratization piece, because I actually think that's a really core value that we have at Emergence, is around democratizing knowledge of technology. It's why we do a lot of training sessions to upskill people in technology, and we set projects up so that clients could be self-sufficient in running the technology, having the right approach. So that's definitely something that's at the core of what we do. When it comes to data, it's becoming easier to provide visibility of data and for business users to manipulate it in order to get the insights that they want. I think we have some really great tools available in order to do that. I think the difficulty is that business users are incredibly daunted by using it. So even with machine learning, there's quite a few platforms out there where they claim that anyone could build a machine learning algorithm. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think you still need some core technical skills in order to do that. But I think the problem they have is that people just fundamentally don't feel confident enough to play around with the data, and they don't know what they're looking for. So there's an educational piece needed around data to think about, well, what do we have? How can we use it? What are the insights? And then to challenge the insights. So, well, are we asking the right questions? Are we actually creating biased output by essentially looking for the answers that we want to hear? So yeah, in terms of democratizing knowledge of AI, I think there's a lot that's underway, and it's definitely moving in that direction. I think data is going to take a bit longer. Right.
There are a lot of questions coming in. Are you still okay to stay another 5 minutes or so? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, So another question is, have you worked in any company or project where AI is used only to accelerate broken processes without re-engineering, and what was the impact?
Sorry, Sarah, you broke up a bit. Do you mind repeating it?
Have you worked in any company or project where AI is used only to accelerate broken processes without re-engineering, and what was the impact?
Yes.
Great
too
question.
many times to count. Yeah, that's a brilliant question. Yeah, I think the tendency, I think this goes broader than just AI. I think with technology, is that organizations try to apply the technology to existing processes without assessing whether that process is even working in the first place. So, and AI particularly, in part due to vendors completely overselling what their products can do and desperately trying to make sales, they really have been pitching to organizations saying, we'll fix your broken process, implement this, it solves all your problems. And of course, that's not the reality. So unfortunately, the impact tends to be that you have more and more business people becoming disillusioned with AI because their expectations weren't framed in the right way to start with, and these AI vendors haven't spent the time to educate them on what their system can do and how it actually works. So it's definitely a real problem. I think we're starting to see a bit of improvement in that space. I don't know if you'd agree, Sarah, but I do think that there's a tendency to kind of go, AI is a silver bullet, it will solve all the broken processes, when actually you fundamentally have to start with what does that process look like. If it's broken when you put it into the AI system, it'll be broken when it comes out of the AI system.
I completely agree. We're getting a number of questions about more women in the field of AI. So our very own Margaret Ross is asking, how could we encourage more girls and women to consider AI? And there's also a question about basically being able to return, being a STEM returner, but finding it very difficult to get back into this kind of the industry, really. Yeah. Any thoughts?
So I think by having more non-technical roles in AI, it will naturally become more diverse, which is why I'm such a huge advocate for it, because I think that, naturally opening it up to people with user-centric and design thinking skills, you're more likely to get hopefully a bit more gender diversity. And I think also that I hope it's changing, but I face a lot of issues in my career that it's not just that it's male dominated, it's that there's always a religious debate about what AI is, what it can do, and everyone has their own opinion, but it turns into technical people explaining what AI is to me as a non-technical person, when I know exactly what it is, I know exactly what it can do, I'm just coming at it from a very different angle. So I think more work needs to be done to marry the technical and non-technical sides to have a more holistic approach. And in terms of returning, I do think it's really difficult. I mean, I by no means a great comparison, but I took some time off in between jobs a couple of years ago, and it was when I was really specialised in AI. It was right before I joined BJSS as head of AI. I took 2 months off, and when I came back, I felt completely out of my depth. The marketplace had moved so dramatically that I felt completely out of touch. And I think that's the nature of the AI marketplace. It will always be evolving, and you can never know everything. There will always be times where someone's like, oh, did you know about this? And you just won't know it. So I'm not sure in terms of tips. I think, to be honest, it would just be read as much as you can, go to all these different sources, and consider different approaches to entering the industry. Maybe look at rather than looking for technical roles or AI specific roles, look at something a bit more generic and working your way through. But please don't give up, because I think everyone has times when they're really struggling to keep up to date with AI. So you're certainly not alone.
That's super. Thank you very much. We do have more questions, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. If we haven't been able to answer your questions, please do reach out. You do have our email addresses, and Katie's is on the screen, and you can reach me on the BCS, through the BCS and BCSWomen. Thank you so much, Katie. Really insightful session. Really appreciate you giving us your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. Please look out for more AI Accelerator events coming into 2021. Good evening. Bye-bye.